Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by the Lion of Benoni, the son of the East Rand, Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing?
How's Nick?
It's very low energy, Marius. I'm disappointed.
How's Nick? Let's go. I'm so excited for the show.
There we go, like you're cheering for the cricket. And joining us for the first time on The Daily Friend Show is Martin van Staden. Martin, welcome to The Daily Friend Show, and welcome also to the IRR.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's excellent to gel with the IRR. It's almost 100 years of working against a lot of the nonsense we'll be talking about today. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Cool.
I just want to say, I think this is the first time we've ever seen a Yorkshire flat cap on the Daily Friend Show.
No, it's an extra added level of style, but one thing about South African classical liberals is we are not. Yeah, we're a bit of an odd bunch. Let's put it that way.
That's putting it lightly, yes.
Yes, I think that speaks for all of us in equal measure, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get into the news story of today, and this is one we have talked about before, but it's worth, I think, examining the details of this particular story. The Kalgro M3 Bridge City development in KwaMashu in KZN, and this is a story from News 24, has 356 residential units that are about to be completed, but the company is desperately trying to sell them, which is a bit of a strange thing to do when you're about to complete a project to kind of try and offload the whole thing. The company, Kalgro M3, says that it will not be planning any new developments in KZN, specifically because they are afraid of the construction mafia. So construction mafia is one of these. Essentially, you start building in an area and a guy shows up and says, hey, you need to include us in this development or else there's going to be problems. And if you say no, then the next time the guy shows up, he's got a large group of men, often with AK-47s and other pieces of firearms and menacing equipment, and they demand a cut. And if you don't cut them in, very bad things can happen to you and your employees. This firm, quoted in the story, says that the lives of its employees are constantly being threatened. Quote, you get so close to AK-47s, you get demands, you get life threats on your site managers. It's not the environment you'd like to work in, said their CEO. It's currently got 2 of these 365 unit development housing developments in KwaMashu. It was also planning to build one in Mhlanga Hills nearby, but it's looking to get out of them as quickly as possible. The CEO also went on to say, in KZN, it's just not possible because KZN has mafias that come in and make it impossible to do business, even if you do good work in the community. The communities are scared of these people. It's unfortunate, but it's hampering delivering in KZN. He said that the company was pretty confident when it started its developments in KZN would be able to manage any issues. They said that after they operated in Soweto and gang-ridden areas in Cape Town, the company thought it had developed the skills to be able to deal with, shall we say, the rough and tumble of South Africa. But KZN, it seems, was on another level, one that the company was not willing to put up with. He's saying of other places in the country, says there the community looks after our sites, the community assists us to make sure we can deliver. That doesn't exist in KZN because communities are so scared of these people. So I think that's quite Martin, we'll start with you. I think this is quite an interesting difference between what's going on in KZN and a lot of other parts of the country. Anytime there's a development or a project anywhere in the country, there's always kind of sort of rent-seeking people and community organizations and stuff that will show up and say, hey, we want a slice of this. And from what the CEO is saying here, you get dealt in and then the problem kind of goes away. People are sort of happy. And in fact, they can become really enthusiastic about developments. But KZN, it seems, is increasingly being run by warlords who are not even connected to people in the area and are operating on a different level of violence. How do we solve this problem?
Yeah, that's a dangerous question to ask me. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with my brand of liberalism, but it's often called libertarianism, and our answer to these things are often encapsulated in what the Americans call the Second Amendment to their constitution. And the nice thing about South Africa is that we still have a very strong common law right to self-defense. Now, I've looked at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crimes report on the construction mafia and KZN, and it notes that there are some very obvious political connections between these groups and politicians in the province. So it's quite possible this is a pilot program to see how a province could be or an economy could be destabilized using this type of conduct. And I mean, this also answers to a large extent why the police have been kind of absent. It's friends of politicians, of political bosses who engage in, they call themselves community business forums, if they're trying to be polite about it. So the police aren't coming. That seems quite clear to me. And we are increasingly moving in that direction in South Africa in many respects. There's a total collapse of state, really from the bottom upwards, from municipalities to provinces to national government. And that really does mean that firms, communities should kind of start taking responsibility for these things for themselves. I'm not saying get into a shooting war around your construction site, but criminals respect force, and if you want to do business in this sector in KwaZulu-Natal, you should do some kind of show of force. Have a security company that secures your construction sites. Don't let these business forums get close to your site manager to even speak to him about any extortion money. So I do think that some initiative has to be taken by ordinary groups and firms. Unfortunately, this initiative against transnational organized crime as a very state-centric solution, the government must get involved. Well, that's the story of our lives. People have been saying that for a decade. It's happening increasingly less. So I think it's time. It's easier said than done, of course. But if the construction industry wants this problem solved, they should look for the solution amongst themselves and from their own resources. I think that's really the only way to nip it in the bud before it spreads to other provinces.
I think, for some business people, it's just not even going to be worth it, because you can set up a huge private security company, and if you have the resources for that and pay them and maybe chase away construction mafia types, or go and look for softer targets. But the stress is intense. And I think especially smaller enterprises are just going to say, well, I'll just go overseas, or I'll go to Botswana where no one is going to do this to me. It's just much easier. Marius, and of course, once again, we come back to one of the big problems here, which is the infiltration of the cops by these kind of criminal elements. And this is not a new problem, but it is a serious problem that just degrades the capacity of the state and law and order in general. From a sort of policy side, what do you think we can actually do to maybe reduce the impact of these these construction mafias?
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes down to the capacity of the state. I mean, this is why this is happening. It's all linked to also, as Martin says, or I think people in the comments, political influence and so on, within these kind of construction mafias and so on. But it's not just in KwaZulu-Natal. I know the issues of zama-zamas in the Free State, in Benoni as well. I mean, people in suburbs can at night hear the zama-zamas blasting and so on, and nothing gets done about it. I think it's also often the zama-zamas probably outgun the police, and the kind of guys that you don't really want to tangle with. So this isn't just an overnight issue, and it's a issue that goes back to the collapsing states, which this is something they're going to have to get to the root cause of. And it's also something that's, I think, it actually poses probably, I mean, I don't want to be alarmist, but maybe an existential threat to South Africa in some ways. We've seen the the state capacity is collapsing KwaZulu-Natal at a rapid rate, it looks like. And KwaZulu-Natal's always been kind of racked by violence. I don't know what it is about the place. I mean, even going back to things like the Anglo-Zulu Wars and so on, but even during the transition in the 1990s, KwaZulu-Natal, along with what's today Gauteng, was obviously the most violent areas. But we still see in KwaZulu-Natal today that there's infighting between ANC councillors. There's lots of violence. People get killed just for councillor posts. It's not even just the ANC anymore. A little while ago, a DA councillor in Umgeni, which is the only municipality in KwaZulu-Natal that's governed by the DA, she was actually shot at. And we've all seen all kinds of things happening in Umgeni where there's violence and protests, which seem to don't. Sometimes they seem to maybe have valid reasons for the protests, but at the time seems to be, ANC officials trying to undermine the DA administration in Umgeni. So I think there's, this isn't an overnight fix, and it's going to be very difficult to do. Well, it looks like the ANC is almost definitely going to be under 50% in KwaZulu-Natal in 2024, and then a coalition government might run the province without the ANC, but they're going to have a very hard task to, turn things around in KwaZulu-Natal, I think. And it's an important province. It's either the second or third biggest province when it comes to, in terms of the economy. Durban is still an important city, but yeah, it's quite worrying what's happening there.
I think it was very appropriate, Morris, that during that entire spiel, there was sort of loud crashes of thunder in the background. It's very ominous. Just on a little bit of a tangent here about Zama Zamas, my father recently visited a site with lots of Zama Zamas around, and he was talking about the sophistication of their operations and how in the Northwest, cops had been battling them at a pretty intense level. It's almost like a war zone. And like the Zama Zamas would sneak into a mine shaft and set up their own Wi-Fi there, which is, not what one might expect when you're kind of thinking of like miners going down into disused mine shafts. And also that there were routinely gun battles where the cops would have to attack a building filled with Zama Zamas, where the Zama Zamas would be on the top floor sniping at them from above. Just a complete nightmare of a situation. That's when the cops are doing their job. I think a lot of the
Sorry,
time
just to interrupt. There was a recent issue at a Sibanye Stillwater mine where Zama Zamas were actually attacking the ordinary workers at the mine. So it's but concerning.
So, Martin, any final thoughts on this topic before we move on to our next one?
Yeah, look, I mean, one would want the state to, through law and order, to come and solve this problem. I just think that there are periods, it's never permanent, but there are periods of these political and state voids that come about throughout history, and then you do have to have something organized and structured and, well, something that subscribes to a sense of order and due process. Fill that void. You don't want the void to be filled by anyone who comes along. So there should be a focus on really getting not just the construction sites organized, but these communities that this company says are terrified, where they get support from other communities and other areas. These communities are simply terrified of people from within their own community, presumably. So these communities, not only the construction companies, but the communities should organize themselves and start finding out how they're going to keep these criminal elements out. And unfortunately, you can't always wait for the state to do this for you. It would be great. Everyone's a taxpayer. It would be great if that money were put to that use. But as an idealist myself, I do think one must never allow your idealism to completely sink any hope of forward progress. So there needs to be a conscious effort to organize and create order from total lawless and illiberal disorder.
Yeah, so I think I've been coming to this conclusion more and more, is that when a new government eventually takes power in this country, its number one priority is going to be to repair the police service and restore law and order to huge parts of the country, because without it, liberty, goodness, prosperity, none of it can thrive. And that's a very concerning issue. Okay, let's talk about our next topic here, and this is an op-ed that also appeared in News 24, and it is about our president, Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, of course, many of the opinion writers for News 24 have been quite, at least in the past, quite supportive of President Ramaphosa, but that has begun to change recently, and this is yet another example of it. So one of the writers here, I forget their name, asks if Cyril is taking part in the global trend of what is called
Juanita Hunter.
Juanita Hunter. There we go. Sorry, Juanita Hunter asks if Cyril Ramaphosa is taking part in the supposed global trend of quiet quitting. So what is quiet quitting? It's this thing that people made up on TikTok, where where people show up to work and do the bare minimum in order to get the paycheck, but have no real intention of actually stressing themselves to do their job, particularly anything above what they're absolutely exactly paid for. It's describing people who are unenthusiastic about their work. We could talk about this maybe a little bit later. I don't really think this is a real thing. It's just called slacking off, and everyone has encountered at least someone in their workplace who does that, but whatever. Anyway, she asks whether Ramaphosa is quiet quitting because she says that he seems to have completely tapped out of his job as president. She refers to this recent story we covered on the Daily Friends show, where the ministerial handbook was amended to include increased privileges for ministers, particularly that they wouldn't have to pay at their official residences for any water or electricity, no matter how much they used, and also that they were exempt from load shedding. She asks, presumably he read and discussed this document, and yet despite everything going on in the country and how bad this was inevitably going to look when it became public knowledge, he signed off on it. And furthermore, let his government spokespeople go out and defend the decision as being, well, look, it's only their official residence. What are you people complaining about? Their private residences, of which they presumably have many, are not being subsidized. Well, as far as we know. Anyway, so apparently now the president has withdrawn this decision and is going to amend the ministerial handbook to send it back to at least what it was. But that hasn't happened yet, and this is similar, she points out, to the whole issue of the big expensive tourism flag, which was touted for a bit and kind of became a bit of a hot button issue. And that it's probably just going to result in nothing, and in a month or two from now, we'll see the ministerial handbook remain unchanged despite promises to do otherwise. So, Marius, is our president quiet quitting?
Well, just on the first point, I think I agree with you. Quiet quitting isn't a new thing. I think probably each generation is a kind of narcissism where they think that they're the protagonist of reality. And, like as we were saying before the show, there are probably like troops of Australopithecus, humanity's ancestors who are maybe not doing as much as other Australopithecus, or however you say the plural of it. So I don't think there's a new thing. I mean, I think it's a bit silly to say as it's like this new thing in the 21st century or whatever the case is. But also with the Cyril Ramaphosa, I don't think he's doing anything different from when he first became got back into government in 2014 when he became deputy president under Jacob Zuma. He's always seemed, to use a term from old Donald Trump, he's always seemed to be a bit low energy. He hasn't really, he hasn't seemed to, really be in the, business of governing. And as we've seen, the country's been pretty much adrift since he became president. So, we can obviously compare a lot of things to his predecessor, Jacob Zuma, and so on. But
we have been drifting in one direction, which is towards the abolition of property rights.
Exactly. Yeah. They're to a massive iceberg that's going to sink the country. But he doesn't seem to be, he's just going through the motions. And it's almost, in a way, it feels like he's given up. And, maybe this is kind of a microcosm of what's happening in the ANC too. The ANC itself seems to be kind of given up. It comes with like ridiculous policy proposals. It seems to be, in many ways, it seems like the ANC is going through the last days of Rome. Grab as much as you can, because we all know we're definitely in the last days of ANC governance in South Africa. It's going to end either within 2 years or before the end of the decade, definitely. And maybe Cyril Ramaphosa feels depressed because he's going to be the last leader of what was a once noble organization that was started with noble aims, and obviously got corrupted when it got to power. And so I don't know. You can also talk about what happened in the 1980s and its links to the Soviet Union and all that kind of thing. But yeah, the ANC is definitely in shadow of what it was. And maybe President Ramaphosa is just a bit upset that he's presiding over it while it falls apart, and it rapidly on a slide to the dustbin of history.
Yeah, this isn't the first time we've kind of made this observation that the president seems a little bit off his game. When he accepted the ANC nomination for president, he made these weird comments about how I've done my best, and the sort of unsaid part was "get off my back, people." But also not a very strong, forthright view. And there was a rumor floating around that Cyril might even consider resigning from the ANC in exchange for some kind of, I don't know, like the Pala Pala investigation being quashed or something like that. Now, that's just wild speculation. I don't think we have much solid evidence behind that. But Martin, is there any possibility that Ramaphosa's second term as ANC president will be much shorter than his first?
Well, I don't know. I take a little bit of a different approach to this. To me, Ramaphosa seems as energetically malicious as he ever was. One would have to give him the benefit of the doubt to think that he's now quiet quitting or that he is losing energy if one does not see him doing good things. He's been doing actively bad things since he's been on the political scene. He might sound nice, he might say some moderate things every now and then in the State of the Nation address, but we must judge our politicians by what they do and what they sign off on. So when he signed off on the ministerial handbook, one must interpret that as him agreeing with it, rather than saying, well, was he just inattentive, or didn't he really read it or something? It's like, no, he read it. He read it very attentively, and he said, this is great, I'm going to sign it. Yeah, and we've seen this from him. He stood up in front of Parliament last month, and he very clearly told the leader of the opposition, no, devolving police power to the Western Cape, no, dream on, man. No, that's not because he's losing interest or he's losing energy. He does not agree. He thinks that what we believe, decentralization, free markets, non-racialism, a dynamic economy, a prosperous citizenry that is really capable of looking after itself and not being dependent on the state. He thinks those are bad things. So I don't think he's losing energy at all. I think he's the ANC's man. He's very popular amongst the ANC. Of course, there's factions, but competing for loot. But ideologically, he's their guy. He's committed to the National Democratic Revolution on the ANC's behalf. I even think he spoke at an SACP conference about a year ago or something of that nature. You don't slip and fall into a South African Communist Party conference by accident. You get in your car and you drive there. You agree to it. So this guy he's not here to help South Africa out of its rut. And when we see him do bad things, we need to interpret that as him being a malicious politician. And we shouldn't put our hopes in him in any way, shape, or form. Whether his second term goes on long or short, I mean, if it's the ANC in power, we're going to get the same old nonsense that's going to keep dragging us down. So we need to take our eggs out of that basket and find a different place to set them down.
I quite like the idea of the accidental communist. It's a very funny image. Morris, your final thoughts on this? We have. I agree with Martin that we have seen a deliberate movement from Ramaphosa, and it's worth remembering. And it's not an entirely fair comparison because we are living in slightly different times. But the economy did actually grow faster under Jacob Zuma, and he did actually not sign one of the expropriation bills that came before him. Things that Cyril, well, firstly, he's made no indication that he's not going to sign the expropriation bill if it gets through the NCOP. And he also looks like the economy is really not going to reach the magnificent heights of the Zuma era under his management. What do you make of this?
It's actually, I mean, I saw a graphic yesterday showing that the countries that are going to grow the fastest in 2022. And some places like we're growing at 10% in big countries, places like Colombia, India at 7% for the year. Obviously, there's a rebound from COVID and so on. But I mean, South Africa is going to not barely grow 2% this year. I mean, it's absolutely
There was recently a study that came out that said that India had lifted 415 million people out of poverty since about the year 2000. So in other words, not since 1960 or something. In the time that the ANC has been firmly in control of government, this is what India's managed to do.
And just compare India to before 1991, and it was still a very state-controlled economy, the license Raj and so that. And there were more people in poverty in India than the whole of Africa. And if you look at graphs today, of course, India's still got a big problem with poverty. But as you say, so many people have been lifted out of poverty, and it's because of the free market. Whereas here in South Africa, it's all about redistribution. Nothing about growing growing the economy and giving people the means to have their own destiny in their hands. But just on the point of Cyril Ramaphosa, he is. I mean, a lot of people voted for him in 2019, even though they don't like the ANC. But there's no such thing as a good ANC. There's the ANC, and whatever you think of it, if you think it's a good or bad thing, but there's no good ANC compared to a bad ANC. And Cyril Ramaphosa is part of the ANC, and we should remember it. And there's no pragmatism in the ANC today. We can talk. There was something different in the 1990s and the early 2000s, and so on. But it's it's making the same mistakes that have happened in other countries, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and so on. And Cyril Ramaphosa is part of the problem.
All right, let's move on to our last topic for today. And this is about the proposed new alcohol laws that have been floating around since at least 2016 and have not been enacted yet. But recently there have been comments from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition that say that based off of evidence they garnered from the COVID pandemic, the lockdown and the alcohol ban, there may be further regulations they want to slap on this alcohol law that government has been kicking around for a bit. So we're not sure of all of the changes involved in it, but some of them include banning alcohol advertising on radio and television, restricting the use of the advertising of alcohol on public platforms, increasing the drinking age from 18 to 21, regulating specific trading days or hours for alcohol to be distributed and manufactured, placing liability on alcohol retailers and manufacturers for harm related to the contravention of these regulations. Proponents of the bill say that it's very important that we pass this as soon as possible and take it out of the sort of legislative back and forth it's been in for a long time, as the costs of alcohol abuse on the country are extremely high. Now, on that point, I do agree with them. South Africa has, I think, a problem with drinking, and particularly with drinking and violence. And I'm even a little bit sympathetic to the idea that some sort of action somewhere by someone has to be taken to try and rein in this problem. But how in the name of the good Lord is raising the drinking age from 18 to 21 when we can't enforce the 18-year-old drinking age now going to make a single difference at all except to make more people underage drinkers? Martin, am I being insane?
No. So normal people like us were sitting around looking at what was happening during lockdown, and we thought, wow, this is the closest South Africa has ever come to having total alcohol prohibition. And it's totally blown up in government's face. People were buying up massive stocks of alcohol. People were brewing their own alcohol and dying. They were dying because they were brewing their own unsafe alcohol and drinking that because they couldn't get it in store. They were dying. And what the government got from that is, yes, we did lockdown. It's clear now we have to regulate alcohol even more. It's like, no, other way. The other way. The prohibition does not work. If people want alcohol and you prohibit it in either by raising the age or outright prohibition, making it too expensive, SEM taxes or whatever have you, people are going to get the alcohol. They're going to get it illegally. They're gonna buy it in large quantities whenever they may do so legally. Maybe if it's not on the Sabbath or on a Sunday. I don't know what religious things are adrift in the current ANC government, which is quite bizarre. People are gonna get it. They are gonna get it just like they get drugs currently if they want it. It's not going to work. It's gonna blow up in people's faces, and the ones who are gonna suffer most are gonna be people who are normal. Drinkers who would have been able to drink from 18 and suddenly now they're criminals. If they drink at the age of 19, they would be criminalized for doing so. And stores that last week was able to sell them something, now they are criminal for selling it to the same person because this law has passed. I mean, you say that something must be done by someone. Absolutely. Again, it comes back to families and communities. I am a teetotaler. I am a comprehensive teetotaler. I have never drunk alcohol ever in my life. So I get the dangers of alcohol. I understand. And it's the same with smoking. I've never smoked. But I also oppose the new smoking regulations and legislation because these things are bad, but government is simply not the answer. If you don't have the morals in your society, if you don't have the community and familial structures to guard against abuse of alcohol and of cigarettes or whatever, of meat, sugar, then you've already lost. The government isn't going to solve it for you. You need to get a healthy social structure in your society if you want to solve these problems. You're going to make more problems by throwing government at the problem.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with that we need to tackle this from a sort of cultural, civic perspective. And also, this is one of the many consequences in part of people being unemployed, of people not having strong families, all these kind of things. Marius, final thoughts on this before we close up for today?
Yeah, it's a bit silly. And I mean, also, as you said, the legislation is going to hold people accountable, the producers and sellers of alcohol. I mean, so if somebody drinks and drives and there's an accident, we'll be able to sue SAB, or somebody drinks too much and their kid has fetal alcohol syndrome, is SAB going to be held responsible? That also comes down to individual responsibility. I mean, we can talk a lot about that, but I think when it comes to alcohol, I think it is up to people to use it responsibly. And yeah, it's more laws that aren't going to work much.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening, and we will, of course, be back tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and cheers. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.